The crack of a bullwhip sliced through the arid Arizona air, making Meredith Duvall flinch as she stood on the weathered wooden auction platform in Willow Creek, Arizona Territory, 1875. The blazing July sun beat down mercilessly, making the tears that threatened to spill from her eyes evaporate before they could trace paths down her dirt-smudged cheeks. Her father's debt, $600 owed to the territory's most ruthless loan shark, had brought her to this moment, this humiliation. $500 for the girl, called a gravelly voice from the crowd of men. Meredith kept her eyes fixed on the distant mountains, refusing to look at the man who sought to purchase her as though she were livestock. $550, came another voice, higher pitched and eager. The auctioneer, a portly man with tobacco-stained teeth and a gaudy silk vest, grinned. "We've got $550 for Miss Duvall. Do I hear 600? Meredith bit the inside of her cheek so hard she tasted blood. 3 weeks ago, she'd been teaching at the schoolhouse, living in the small but comfortable home she shared with her father. Then Carson Duvall had been found dead in an alley behind the saloon, a bullet in his chest and gambling markers in his pocket. The debt collector had come calling the very next day. 600, called a voice from the back of the crowd. The auctioneer's face lit up. $600. That'll clear the debt, going once. 800. The crowd parted like the Red Sea, revealing a tall figure at the back. Meredith squinted against the sun, making out a broad-shouldered silhouette topped by a wide-brimmed hat. "Well now," the auctioneer said, clearly surprised. $800 from Mr. Alexander Steele. Do I hear 1,000? The tall man interrupted, his voice calm and measured. A murmur rippled through the crowd. No one had expected the bidding to go this high for the schoolteacher's daughter. $1,000. The auctioneer's excitement was palpable. Going once, going twice. Sold. To Mr. Steele for $1,000. As the crowd dispersed, some grumbling about the unexpected outcome, Meredith finally looked at her purchaser as he approached the platform. Alexander Steele cut an imposing figure well over 6 feet tall with broad shoulders and a lean waist. His face was tanned from the sun, with sharp cheekbones and a strong jaw partially obscured by several days' growth of beard. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, a striking blue that reminded her of the sky after a summer storm. "Miss Duvall," he said, tipping his hat, "I believe we have some business to attend to." She lifted her chin, determined not to show fear despite the trembling in her limbs. "I suppose we do, Mr. Steele." The auctioneer handed over the papers, which Steele signed with quick, confident strokes. Meredith felt sick watching the transaction that officially made her this stranger's property. "This way," Steele said, offering his arm. She ignored it, stepping down from the platform on her own, stumbling slightly as her legs, numb from standing for hours, struggled to support her weight. Steele's hand shot out to steady her, but he withdrew it the moment she regained her balance. "My horse is this way," he said, gesturing toward a magnificent chestnut stallion tethered outside the general store. "And where are you taking me?" Meredith asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Steele glanced down at her, his expression unreadable. "First, to get something to eat. You look like you haven't had a proper meal in days." It was true. Since her father's death and the seizure of their home, she'd been kept in the sheriff's jail, given just enough food and water to keep her alive until the auction. And then Steele reached into his pocket and pulled out the contract he'd just signed. With deliberate movements, he tore it in half, then quarters, then eighths, letting the pieces flutter to the ground. "And then, Miss Duvall, you're free to go wherever you please." Meredith stared at him, certain she'd misheard. "What?" I said, "you're free. The debt is paid." He gestured to the torn paper. "I have no intention of collecting on what that paper claimed to give me." She felt light-headed, disbelieving. Why would you pay so much money just to let me go? A hint of a smile touched his lips. Let's discuss it over a meal. The hotel serves a decent stew. Too stunned to argue, Meredith followed him across the dusty street to Willow Creek's only hotel, a two-story building with peeling paint and a sagging porch. Inside, the dining room was mercifully cool and dim after the glaring sunlight. Steele chose a table in the corner, far from the few other patrons, and pulled out a chair for her. "Order whatever you'd like," he said, taking his seat across from her. The waitress, a tired-looking woman in her 40s, approached their table. "Beef stew for the lady," Steele said, "and coffee. I'll have the same." "Yes, Mr. Steele," the waitress said, hurrying away. Meredith studied her rescuer. "You're known here. I have a ranch about 10 miles west of town. And you came to town today specifically to attend an auction." She couldn't keep the bitterness from her voice. He met her gaze directly. "I came to town to stop an injustice. You don't know me. I know enough." He leaned back in his chair. "I knew your father." She stiffened. "Most people who knew my father wouldn't spend $1,000 to help his daughter. I'm not most people." He paused as the waitress returned with their coffee. "Your father and I had our differences, but no one deserves what they were trying to do to you." The stew arrived, and Meredith found herself ravenous despite her confusion. She ate in silence for several minutes before setting down her spoon. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For the meal and the rest," Steele nodded. "Do you have somewhere to go? Family?" "No, no family. I was teaching at the school, but—" She gestured vaguely. "I doubt they'll have me back now." "Why not? Scandal. You know how people talk. The teacher whose father got himself killed over gambling debts, who was sold at auction." She blinked rapidly, fighting back tears. "People have short memories when it suits them," Steele replied. "But if you need time, I have a proposition for you." Meredith tensed. "What kind of proposition?" "Nothing improper," he assured her quickly. "My housekeeper left 2 weeks ago to care for her ailing mother in St. Louis. The ranch house is in disarray, and I could use help getting it back in order. It would be a temporary position with pay until you decide what you want to do next." She studied him, searching for deception in those blue eyes and finding none. "Why are you being so kind to me?" Steele was quiet for a moment. "Perhaps I'm tired of seeing good people crushed by circumstances beyond their control." Something in his voice told her there was more to the story, but she didn't press. Instead, she considered his offer. What choice did she really have? Her home was gone, her possessions sold to cover part of her father's debt. She had no money and nowhere to go. "I accept your offer, Mr. Steele. Thank you." He nodded, finishing his coffee. "We should get going. It'll be dark in a few hours." "I don't have any belongings," she said, embarrassed. "We'll stop at the general store. Get whatever you need for now." An hour later, with a small trunk of necessities loaded onto Steele's wagon which he'd collected from the livery stable, they set out for his ranch. Meredith sat beside him on the wagon seat, watching as the town of Willow Creek grew smaller behind them. "It's called Cottonwood Creek Ranch," Steele said as they traveled. "Been building it up for 5 years now. Alone, with hired hands. 4 cowboys work the cattle. There's a cook who handles meals for the bunkhouse. You'll meet them tomorrow. And the main house. That's where I'll be working," he nodded. "It's nothing fancy, but it's solid. 4 bedrooms, though only mine is in use. A study, kitchen, dining room, parlor. It sounds lovely." Steele gave a non-committal grunt. "It needs a woman's touch, I suppose." They fell into silence, the rhythmic clip-clop of the horses' hooves and the creaking of the wagon the only sounds as they traveled through the rugged landscape. Meredith found herself stealing glances at her companion, still unable to fully comprehend why this stranger had come to her rescue. The sun was low on the horizon when they crested a hill, and Cottonwood Creek Ranch came into view. Meredith couldn't suppress a gasp. The main house was much larger than she'd imagined, a handsome two-story structure of timber and stone with a wide, wraparound porch. Nearby stood a large barn, corral, and bunkhouse. A creek wound its way through the property, lined with the cottonwoods that gave the ranch its name. "It's beautiful," she said softly. Steele looked pleased despite himself. "It's home." As they approached, a dog came bounding from the direction of the bunkhouse, a large, shaggy beast with mismatched eyes, one blue and one brown. "That's Ranger," Steele said. "Don't worry, he's friendly." The dog circled the wagon, barking joyfully at Steele's return. When they pulled up to the house, a man emerged from the barn, short and wiry, with leathery skin and a weathered face that spoke of decades in the sun. "Boss," he called, approaching the wagon. "Didn't expect you back till tomorrow." His curious gaze fell on Meredith. "Change of plans, Pete." Steele jumped down from the wagon and came around to help Meredith. His hands were strong and warm as they encircled her waist, lifting her effortlessly to the ground. "This is Miss Meredith Duvall. She'll be taking over as housekeeper for a while. Miss Duvall, this is Pete Wilson, my foreman." Pete touched the brim of his hat. "Madam, welcome to Cottonwood Creek." "Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Pete, could you have one of the boys bring Miss Duvall's trunk to the house? We'll be inside." "Sure thing, boss." Steele led her up the porch steps and opened the front door. The interior was dim in the fading light, but Meredith could make out a spacious entryway with doors leading off in several directions and a staircase ascending to the second floor. "Let me light some lamps," Steele said, striking a match. Soon, the warm glow of lamplight revealed a home that, while not neglected, clearly showed the absence of regular care. A thin layer of dust covered the furniture, and there were signs that a man had been living alone: boots by the door, a hat on the sideboard, a coffee cup left on a small table. "The kitchen's through there," Steele said, pointing. "Dining room to the right, parlor to the left. My study is at the back of the house. Upstairs are the bedrooms. You can take your pick of the 3 unused ones." "Thank you," she said, still somewhat overwhelmed by the day's events. "When would you like me to start my duties?" "Tomorrow's soon enough. Tonight you should rest." He gestured toward the kitchen. "There should be some cold chicken and bread for a light supper. I'll have a hot bath sent up for you afterward." True to his word, within an hour, 2 of the ranch hands had carried a copper tub to her chosen bedroom, the smallest of the 3, but with a lovely view of the mountains, and filled it with steaming water. Meredith nearly wept at the luxury of it after weeks of neglect in the jail cell. As she soaked, washing away the grime and humiliation of the auction block, she tried to make sense of her situation. Why had Alexander Steele really paid such a sum to free her? What did he know of her father? And could she truly trust that his intentions were as honorable as they seemed? But the warm water and exhaustion from the emotional day soon overcame her concerns, and by the time she dried off and slipped into the simple nightgown she'd purchased at the general store, Meredith could barely keep her eyes open. She fell into the clean bed, asleep almost before her head touched the pillow. She woke the next morning to sunlight streaming through the window and the distant sounds of ranch life, men calling to one another, horses neighing, the lowing of cattle. For a moment, disoriented, she couldn't remember where she was. Then yesterday's events rushed back and she sat up abruptly. A knock sounded at her door. "Miss Duvall," came Steele's voice. "Breakfast will be ready in 20 minutes if you'd care to join me." "Yes, thank you," she called back. "I'll be down shortly." She dressed quickly in one of her new dresses, a practical blue cotton garment suitable for housework, and pulled her long brown hair into a simple knot at the nape of her neck. When she descended the stairs, she found Steele waiting in the dining room, a newspaper open before him. He rose when she entered. "Good morning. I trust you slept well." "Better than I have in weeks," she admitted. "Thank you again for your kindness." He gestured for her to sit, and she noticed the table was already set with plates of eggs, bacon, and biscuits. A pot of coffee sat steaming in the center. "I managed this much," he said, a touch of self-deprecation in his voice, "though I won't subject you to my cooking after today." Meredith smiled despite herself. "It looks wonderful." They ate in surprisingly comfortable silence for a few minutes before Steele spoke again. "I need to ride out with the men today to check on the north pasture. Will you be all right here alone? Of course. I'll have plenty to keep me busy." She glanced around the dining room, noting the dust on the sideboard and the slightly grimy windows. "Take your time getting settled. Don't feel you need to transform the place in a day." "I enjoy having work to do," she said honestly. "It helps me not think too much." Something like understanding flickered in his eyes. "I know that feeling well." He folded his newspaper and stood. "I should be back by supper. Feel free to explore the house and grounds. Ranger will probably appoint himself your guardian while I'm gone. He's taken a liking to you." As if summoned by his name, the shaggy dog appeared in the doorway, tail wagging hopefully. "We'll get along fine," Meredith assured him, offering Ranger a piece of bacon, which he accepted with gentle manners that belied his size. After Steele departed, Meredith spent the morning taking stock of the house. It was well built and tastefully furnished, though in need of a thorough cleaning. The kitchen was large and well equipped, with a modern cast iron range that must have cost a small fortune to transport to the Arizona territory. By midday, she had swept the downstairs rooms and was dusting the parlor when she noticed a framed photograph on the mantel. Curious, she picked it up. It showed a younger Alexander Steele standing beside a pretty woman with dark hair. They were dressed formally, and though neither was smiling broadly, photographs required such long exposure times that smiles were difficult to maintain. There was happiness in their eyes. "His wife," came a voice from behind her. Meredith nearly dropped the photograph, spinning around to find Pete Wilson standing in the doorway, hat in hand. "I'm sorry to startle you, madam." Door was open. "It's all right," she said, carefully replacing the photograph. "Mr. Steele is married." Pete's weathered face grew solemn. "Was. Mrs. Alexander Steele passed on 3 years ago. Fever took her." "I'm so sorry," Meredith said, feeling a stab of sympathy for her employer. "I didn't know. Not many do nowadays. Boss doesn't talk about it much." Pete shifted uncomfortably. "Anyway, I just came to check if you needed anything from town. Sending one of the boys in for supplies." "No, thank you. I have everything I need for now." Pete nodded and turned to go, then paused. "Miss Duvall, the boss. He's a good man, best I've ever worked for. Whatever brought you here, you're safe at Cottonwood Creek." With that cryptic reassurance, he left, leaving Meredith to contemplate the photograph and what she'd learned. Alexander Steele was a widower. Perhaps that explained some of his solitary nature, the hint of sadness she sometimes glimpsed in his eyes. The revelation made her see her benefactor in a new light, not just as the mysterious rancher who'd saved her from a terrible fate, but as a man who had known his own share of loss and pain. She worked through the afternoon, finding comfort in the rhythmic tasks of cleaning and organizing. By the time the sun was beginning to set, she had prepared a simple but hearty supper of beef stew and fresh bread, using supplies from the well-stocked pantry. Steele returned as dusk was falling, bringing with him the smell of horses, leather, and the outdoors. He appeared surprised to find the house transformed, surfaces gleaming, floors swept, and the aroma of cooking filling the air. "You've been busy," he observed, hanging his hat on a hook by the door. "I told you I like to keep occupied," she replied. "Supper will be ready shortly if you'd like to wash up." Something like appreciation crossed his features. "Thank you, I'll do that." When he returned, freshly washed and in a clean shirt, Meredith had the table set and the food waiting. They ate together, and gradually, the initial awkwardness between them began to fade. Steele asked about her day, and she told him about the work she'd accomplished, carefully avoiding any mention of the photograph she'd discovered. "You were a teacher in town?" he asked after a while. She nodded. "For 2 years. I taught children from 6 to 14, all in one room." "You must be good with children." "I love teaching," she admitted, a wistful note creeping into her voice. "Watching a child learn something new, seeing that moment when understanding dawns, there's nothing quite like it. How did you come to be a teacher in Willow Creek?" "It's not exactly a place most young women would choose." Meredith hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "My father moved us here after my mother died. He had a restless spirit. We never stayed anywhere very long when I was growing up." "But you stayed in Willow Creek?" "Yes. I was tired of moving, and I thought—" She sighed. "I thought perhaps if we put down roots, my father might find some stability." Steele's expression softened. "Carson always had a talent for finding trouble, even when we were boys." She looked up sharply. "You knew him that long ago?" He nodded. "We grew up together in Missouri, lost touch for many years, then ran into each other in Willow Creek about 3 years ago. He never mentioned you." "I'm not surprised." A shadow crossed Steele's face. "We didn't part on the best terms the last time we spoke." "What happened between you?" Steele was quiet for a long moment, and Meredith thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, "Your father borrowed money from me, a considerable sum. When I found out it was for gambling, I refused to lend him more. We had words, harsh ones." Meredith felt a familiar mixture of disappointment and resignation. "That sounds like my father, always looking for the quick solution, the big win." "He wasn't a bad man," Steele said, "just weak in certain ways." "Yes," she agreed softly, "that's a fair assessment." They finished their meal in silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable, more contemplative. Afterward, Steele insisted on helping clear the table despite her protests. "I've been taking care of myself for 3 years," he reminded her. "I'm not entirely helpless in a kitchen." As they worked side by side, Meredith found herself acutely aware of his presence, the breadth of his shoulders, the careful way his large hands handled the china dishes, the faint scent of soap and leather that clung to him. It was unsettling. "I should turn in," she said when they finished. "It's been a long day," he nodded. "Of course. Good night, Miss Duvall." "Good night, Mr. Steele." As she climbed the stairs to her room, Meredith tried to sort through her conflicting emotions. Gratitude, certainly this man had saved her from a terrible fate. Curiosity about his connection to her father. And something else, something that made her pulse quicken when he looked at her with those intense blue eyes. She pushed the thought away. She was his employee, nothing more. And she had far more pressing concerns than inappropriate feelings for her employer. The days at Cottonwood Creek Ranch fell into a rhythm. Meredith rose early, prepared breakfast for Steele before he rode out with the men, spent her days cleaning, cooking, and gradually bringing order to the house. In the evenings, they would share supper, their conversations growing longer and more comfortable as the days passed. She learned more about him in these quiet evenings. How he had come west as a young man, worked as a cowhand on various ranches, saved every penny until he could buy his own land. How he had met Alina, the daughter of a neighboring rancher, and courted her for a year before they married. How they had built Cottonwood Creek together, dreaming of raising a family there. He never spoke directly of Alina's death, but Meredith could see the pain it still caused him in the way his voice would sometimes falter. how his eyes would drift to that photograph on the mantel. For her part, Meredith shared stories of her nomadic childhood, her determination to get an education despite their frequent moves, her joy in teaching. She found herself opening up to him in ways she hadn't with anyone in years. A month passed, and summer began to give way to fall. The days grew slightly cooler, and the evening light took on a golden quality that transformed the landscape into something magical. Meredith had come to love the ranch, the wide open spaces, the majestic mountains in the distance, the peaceful sound of the creek. And she had to admit to herself, she had come to care for its owner as well. It was a crisp September evening when everything changed. Steele had been in town all day on business, and Meredith was in the kitchen preparing supper when she heard the front door open. "Something smells wonderful," came his voice closer than she expected. She turned to find him standing in the kitchen doorway, holding a parcel wrapped in brown paper. "Welcome back," she said, smiling. "How was town?" "Same as always, dusty and full of gossip." He stepped forward, offering the parcel. "I brought you something." Surprised, Meredith wiped her hands on her apron before accepting it. "What's this?" "Open it and see." She carefully unwrapped the package to reveal 3 books, a volume of poetry by Emily Dickinson, a copy of Jane Eyre, and a newer novel she'd been wanting to read. "You mentioned your books were sold with the rest of your belongings," he said, a touch of uncertainty in his voice. "I thought you might like some reading material." Meredith stared at the books, deeply touched by his thoughtfulness. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. This means a great deal to me." "It's nothing," he said, clearly pleased by her reaction despite his modest words. She looked up at him, suddenly aware of how close they were standing. Something in his expression made her breath catch a warmth, an intensity she hadn't seen before. For a moment, neither moved. Then the pot on the stove began to boil over, breaking the spell. Meredith turned quickly to attend to it, her cheeks flushed. "Supper will be ready soon," she said, her voice not quite steady. "I'll go wash up," he replied, and she could hear a similar unsteadiness in his tone. That evening, there was a new awareness between them, a tension that hadn't existed before. Their conversation at supper was punctuated by long silences and averted gazes. When their fingers accidentally brushed as they both reached for the breadbasket, Meredith felt a jolt of electricity that had nothing to do with static in the dry air. After the meal, instead of retiring to his study as usual, Steele suggested they sit on the porch to enjoy the evening air. They sat in rocking chairs, watching as the last light faded from the sky and the stars began to appear. "When I first came west," Steele said softly, "the stars amazed me. You can't see them like this back east with all the city lights and smoke." "They are beautiful," Meredith agreed, tilting her head back to take in the vast expanse of the night sky. "It makes you feel small, doesn't it? But not in a bad way." He turned to look at her, his expression thoughtful in the moonlight. "You've been good for this place, Meredith." It was the first time he had used her given name, and the intimacy of it sent a pleasant shiver through her. "The house, you mean?" she asked. "The house, the ranch," he paused. Her heart began to race. Alex, a commotion from the direction of the bunkhouse, interrupted her. Lights flared, and they could hear men shouting. Steele was on his feet instantly, all business. "Stay here," he ordered, striding toward the disturbance. Meredith watched anxiously from the porch as Steele disappeared into the darkness. Minutes later, the ranch hands were mounting horses, and she could make out Pete Wilson's voice giving directions. Something was seriously wrong. Unable to bear the suspense, she hurried down the porch steps and toward the activity. She caught up with Steele as he was saddling his horse. "What's happening?" she asked. "Rustlers," he replied grimly. Pete spotted them trying to drive off some of our cattle from the north pasture. That's where the new calves are, she said, having learned much about the ranch's operations over the past month. He nodded. We need to head them off before they get to the pass. If they make it through, we'll lose them. Fear clutched at her heart. Be careful. For a moment, his determined expression softened. I will. Then, in a move that caught her completely by surprise, he leaned down from his saddle and pressed a quick, firm kiss to her lips. Wait up for me. Before she could respond, he was gone, galloping after the other men, leaving her standing in the yard with her fingers pressed to her tingling lips. The wait was agonizing. Meredith paced the house, unable to settle, jumping at every sound. Hours passed with no word. She kept coffee brewing, knowing the men would need it when they returned, and tried to distract herself by reading one of her new books, but the words swam before her eyes. It was well past midnight when she heard horses approaching. She rushed outside, lantern in hand, to see the men returning. Her heart sank when she saw Pete Wilson supporting a slumped figure on horseback. Alex. He's been shot, Pete called when he saw her. Not too bad, but he's lost some blood. The next hour was a blur of activity. The ranch hands helped carry Steele to his bedroom, where Meredith examined the wound, a bullet graze across his upper arm, painful but not life-threatening. She cleaned and bandaged it while Pete explained what had happened. Caught up to the rustlers at the edge of the property. There was shooting. We got our cattle back, and the sheriff's posse will be looking for the rustlers come morning. Thank you, Pete, she said. I'll look after him now. When they were alone, Meredith sat on the edge of Steele's bed, relief and anger warring within her. You could have been killed, she said, her voice tight with emotion. He looked up at her, pale but alert. Occupational hazard. Don't joke about this. His expression sobered. I'm sorry I worried you. She shook her head, fighting back tears. When I saw you slumped over that horse, I thought. Meredith, he said softly, taking her hand. I'm all right. This time, she whispered. They looked at each other in the lamplight, the unspoken feelings between them growing impossible to ignore. Before I left, he said, I kissed you. Yes. I'd like to do it again if you'll allow it. Her heart hammered in her chest. I would allow it. He reached up with his uninjured arm, his hand cupping the back of her neck, drawing her down to him. This kiss was different from the first, not rushed or impulsive, but deliberate and tender. His lips were warm against hers, and when they parted, she felt as though something fundamental had shifted in her world. I never expected this, he murmured, his forehead resting against hers. When I went to that auction, I only meant to right a wrong I never thought. What? She prompted when he fell silent. I never thought I'd find someone who could make me feel this way again. His blue eyes searched hers. I care for you, Meredith, more than I should, perhaps, given the circumstances. She laid her palm against his cheek. I care for you too, Alex. These past weeks, you've become very important to me. He caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. Stay with me tonight, just to talk, to be near. I find I don't want to be alone. She nodded, settling into the chair beside his bed. They talked long into the night about their pasts, their hopes, their fears. Meredith spoke of her worry that she would never teach again, that the scandal of the auction would follow her. Alex shared his guilt over Alina's death, how he had been away on business when she fell ill, how he hadn't been there at the end. It wasn't your fault, Meredith told him, squeezing his hand. I know that in my head, but my heart. He sighed. For a long time, I thought I would never let myself care for anyone again. It hurt too much to lose her. And now, he looked at her, his gaze unwavering. Now I find myself willing to risk that pain again, because what's growing between us, it feels worth the risk. They fell asleep as dawn was breaking, Meredith still in the chair beside his bed, her hand clasped in his. The days that followed brought a new sweetness to life at Cottonwood Creek. As Alex recovered from his injury, their relationship deepened. They spent evenings reading aloud to each other, sharing stories from their pasts, learning each other's hearts. Their kisses grew more passionate, though Alex, ever the gentleman, never pressed for more. "I want to court you properly," he told her one evening as they sat on the porch swing, his arm around her shoulders. "Not as my housekeeper, but as a woman I deeply respect and admire." "I've been thinking," Meredith said, resting her head against his shoulder, "about the school in Willow Creek. Term starts again next month." She felt him tense slightly. "Are you thinking of returning to teaching, if they'll have me?" She looked up at him. Would that change things between us?" His expression was serious. "Only in that I'd have to ride into town more often to see you." "Meredith, I would never stand in the way of your passion for teaching." Relief washed over her. "Thank you. It means a great deal to hear you say that." The following week, they rode into Willow Creek together. Meredith held her head high as they made their way down the main street, acutely aware of the curious stares and whispers that followed them. Willow Creek's memory was not as short as Alex had suggested. Everyone remembered the schoolteacher's daughter who had been sold at auction. Their first stop was the school board chairman's home. Mr. Pemberton, a severe man with mutton chop whiskers, received them in his parlor, his expression guarded. "Miss Duvall," he said stiffly, "we'd heard you had left town." "I've been working at Mr. Steele's ranch," she replied. "But I understand the school term begins soon and you may be in need of a teacher." Pemberton shifted uncomfortably. "Well now, that's a delicate matter, given the circumstances of your departure." Miss Duvall was a victim of those circumstances, not their architect, Alex interrupted, his voice cool but firm. "She is the same excellent teacher she was before her father's death. The children of this town deserve the best education possible, and from what I understand, no one has been hired to replace her." Pemberton looked from Alex to Meredith, clearly weighing his options. "There has been some discussion among the board members. Many parents have asked about Miss Duvall's return." Hope bloomed in Meredith's chest. "Then you'll consider my application." "There will need to be a board meeting," Pemberton hedged, "and certain assurances about propriety." "Miss Duvall's character is beyond reproach," Alex said, a dangerous edge to his voice. "And I will personally vouch for her." After further discussion, Pemberton agreed to call a special meeting of the school board the following week to consider reinstating Meredith to her position. As they left Pemberton's house, Alex took her hand. "That went better than expected." She squeezed his fingers. "Thank you for speaking on my behalf. I only spoke the truth." He glanced down at her, his expression softening. "There's one more stop I'd like to make while we're in town." He led her to the jeweler's shop at the end of the street. Meredith's heart began to race as the implications became clear. Inside, he asked to see a selection of rings. The jeweler, a small man with spectacles perched on the end of his nose, brought out a velvet tray. "This is a bit premature," Alex said quietly, so only she could hear. "We've known each other such a short time, but I want you to know my intentions are serious. Choose one that pleases you and when the time is right." Tears pricked at Meredith's eyes. "Are you sure?" He looked at her, his gaze steady and certain. "I've never been more sure of anything." Her fingers hovered over the tray before selecting a simple gold band set with a small, perfect diamond. "An excellent choice, miss," the jeweler said. "Simple but elegant." "Just like its future owner," Alex added, his eyes never leaving hers. They left the shop with the ring secured in Alex's pocket, a promise for the future. The week that followed was one of nervous anticipation as they waited for the school board's decision. When word came that Meredith had been reinstated as teacher, contingent on her continued good character, they celebrated with a special dinner at the ranch. "To new beginnings," Alex said, raising his glass. "And second chances," Meredith added, touching her glass to his. That evening, as they stood on the porch under a canopy of stars, Alex took her hands in his. "I know this may seem fast," he said, his voice husky with emotion. "But when you find something precious, you don't let it slip away. Meredith Duvall, I've come to love you. Will you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Meredith felt tears of joy spill down her cheeks. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then drew her into a kiss that promised a lifetime of happiness. They were married a month later in a simple ceremony at the ranch, attended by the Hands, a few townsfolk who had remained loyal to Meredith, and even Mr. Pemberton, who had gradually warmed to the idea of his teacher marrying one of the territory's most respected ranchers. As fall turned to winter, they settled into a routine that suited them both. Meredith rode into town each day to teach, returning to the ranch in the evenings. On weekends, they worked side by side on various projects around the property. At night, they discovered the joys of marriage, finding in each other's arms a passion neither had expected to know again, or, in Meredith's case, at all. "I never thought I could be this happy," Meredith told her husband one snowy evening as they lay curled together before the fire in their bedroom. "After Father died, when they put me in that jail cell, I thought my life was over." Alex pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her temple. "When Alina died, I felt the same way. I thought that chapter of my life, love, companionship, was finished." She turned in his arms to face him. "And now I know that life can surprise you," he said, tracing her cheek with gentle fingers. "Sometimes in terrible ways, but sometimes in ways so wonderful you can hardly believe your good fortune." Spring brought new calves to the ranch, and news that brought both joy and trepidation. Meredith was expecting a child. "Are you happy?" she asked anxiously after telling Alex. His response was to lift her off her feet, spinning her around in the middle of the kitchen. "Happy doesn't begin to describe it," he said, setting her down gently and dropping to his knees to press a reverential kiss to her still flat stomach. "I love you, Meredith Steele, you and our child." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, though Meredith reluctantly gave up teaching for the duration. The school board, now fully supportive, promised her position would be waiting when she was ready to return. On a warm July evening, almost exactly a year after Alex had purchased her freedom at the auction, Meredith gave birth to a son. They named him William Carson Steele, William for Alex's father, Carson for Meredith's. "He would be proud," Alex said as they gazed down at their newborn son. "Your father, I mean. Proud that his daughter has found happiness." "I like to think so," Meredith agreed. "Despite his flaws, he did love me." "And now you have a family who will never let you down," Alex promised, gathering his wife and son in a gentle embrace. As their son grew, so did Cottonwood Creek Ranch. Alex's careful management and shrewd investments paid off, making them one of the most prosperous families in the territory. 2 years after William's birth, a daughter joined their family, Alina Rose, named for Alex's first wife and Meredith's mother. Life wasn't always easy. The Arizona Territory could be harsh and unforgiving. There were droughts that threatened the cattle, illnesses that swept through the town, and occasional conflicts with rustlers or bandits. But through it all, Alex and Meredith faced the challenges together, their love deepening with each passing year. 5 years after their marriage, they hosted a grand celebration at the ranch for their anniversary. The house and grounds were filled with friends, neighbors, and even a few relatives who had made the journey from back east. As twilight fell, lanterns were lit around the property, casting a magical glow over the gathering. Alex found Meredith standing alone for a moment, watching their children play with the other youngsters. "Happy?" he asked, slipping his arm around her waist. She leaned into him, contentment radiating from her. "Completely. You, more than I ever thought possible." He turned her to face him. "Do you ever think about that day, the auction?" "Sometimes," she admitted. "It seems like another lifetime now, another person. If I hadn't been there." She pressed her finger to his lips. "But you were. You saved me that day, Alex." He shook his head. "No, my love, you saved me." He took her hand, the one wearing his ring, and brought it to his lips. "I was existing, not living. You brought me back to life." From across the yard, William called for his mother, eager to show her a frog he had caught. Elena toddled after her brother, her chubby legs working hard to keep up. "Our children need us," Meredith said with a smile. "Go ahead. I'll join you in a moment." As Meredith moved away to attend to their children, Alex watched her go, marveling at the twist of fate that had brought her into his life. He had gone to an auction intending only to right a wrong, to save the daughter of an old friend from a terrible fate. Instead, he had found a love so deep and true it had healed wounds he thought would never mend. And Meredith, who had once stood trembling on an auction platform, her future in the hands of strangers, now moved with confidence and joy, secure in the knowledge that she was loved, respected, and cherished. As the stars came out over Cottonwood Creek Ranch, Alex joined his family, gathering his son in one arm and his daughter in the other, while Meredith leaned against his shoulder. Together, they watched the evening sky fill with light, their hearts full of gratitude for the unexpected journey that had brought them home to each other. In the years that followed, their love story became something of a legend in Willow Creek, how Alexander Steele had paid a fortune to free Meredith Duvall from bondage, only to find himself willingly captivated by her heart. Their ranch flourished, their children grew strong and kind, and their devotion to each other never wavered. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the children were asleep, Alex and Meredith would sit on their porch, hands intertwined, and marvel at how the darkest moments of their lives had led them to their greatest joy, each other.